Welcome back, everybody. In this section we talk about geologic age. So the core question here is trying to answer which chapter of Earth's history are we in? Are we somewhere towards the bottom, long ago in Earth's history, or are we somewhere more recent, closer to the Ice Age or the Age of Mammal? First, though, we have to talk about the geologic time scale. Earth's history is long, more than 4 billion years old, and the history is divided into these different pieces. And the best way to think about this is to think about which book, which section of that book, which chapter, or maybe which scene. And we'll go into detail here, but on this slide I have the full geologic timescale broken down. Everything from the Holocene, the time of human beings, all the way back to the Haitian, as far back in time as we're able to go. So the biggest units of Earth history, the biggest pieces are called eons. These are the books in Earth's history. And there's 4 of these we'll talk about. We have first the Haitian, then the Archean, the Proterozoic, and the Phenerozoic. And we'll go into more detail on these now. First is the Haitian eon. All right, this is like Hades. You imagine a hot Earth, no continents, it is just formed. And this is actually the time period in Earth's history that is so far back that there is no physical record or physical trace that it ever existed. Next is the Archean. We have the formation of the very first little continents. We have the appearance of the very first life on Earth. And we have these fellows, you might remember the stromatolites. They start working via photosynthesis, but we don't have oxygen in the air first. And this here is sort of an artist's depiction of what the world might have looked like at this time. Next we have the Proterozoic eon. So what happens here? We have multicellular life in the ocean, we have oxygen appearing in the atmosphere, and by the end, we finally start to get some animal-like forms that appear in the fossil record, maybe even animals. And our final and most important eon is the Phenerozoic eon. So this is where we have abundant animal life and plant life. We start to have animals which develop hard shells, so they leave behind fossils, which we can find now. This is the age of fish, dinosaurs, reptiles, mammals, everything, including everything up till the recent present. And this is going to be the most important book in Earth's history for this course. So the time period that we're in right now is the Phenerozoic. This is our current eon. It means visible life, life that you don't need a microscope to see. And this book is divided into 3 sections called eras. First was the Paleozoic, sort of the age of fish, aquatic life, ancient life. Then we have the Mesozoic in the middle, meso means middle, and then the Cenozoic, which is all of recent life on Earth. And in between these 3 eras, the dividing lines between them are mass extinction events. So, in more detail, going all the way back to the beginning of the most recent book here, our first section is the Paleozoic era. Paleo is old here. So it starts out with something called the Cambrian explosion. Essentially, you go from very little animal life on Earth, maybe a little bit of it, to a ton of animal life all within a short period. That's why it's called an explosion. And at first, this life is contained mostly to the sea, well, actually exclusively to the sea. And then gradually you have more and more life getting onto land, plants first, and then later animals. And by the end of this era, we have the formation of Pangea, as well as the largest mass extinction ever. Some sort of event or series of events which wiped out more than 80% of all species on the face of the Earth. So our next era here in the middle is the Mesozoic era. All right, we finally get to dinosaurs. It starts and ends with mass extinction events. We have a very hot climate during this time period, especially compared to today. The forests and plant life, everything on land, would have resembled modern forests to a large degree. You might remember this as being the age of reptiles, and of course at the end is the famous meteor impact which wiped out the dinosaurs. So then our last era, right, we have 4 books. We go to the most recent book here, and in that book we are in the last section. This is the Cenozoic era. So we have animals, mammals especially, dominating Earth. Overall it is cooler than the era before. Pangea has, of course, broken up by this time, and continents are starting to get into the positions they're in today. We have our geologically and biologically modern Earth. So let's return to our geologic timescale now. We talked about our eons, the big books. We talked about eras, which are sort of the sections inside of those books, and now finally we divide those eras into shorter units which are called geologic periods. You might think of these as being chapters. Generally speaking, periods are the most useful way to talk about time on Earth. The reason, of course, a book is too big, but an individual page is too small, so instead you use chapters, use periods. Things that you have heard of before, maybe like the Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, these are time periods. For the most part, this is what we're going to use when we talk about geologic time in the course. Now, the periods themselves can be broken down even further, all the way here on the right, into epochs, right? So even smaller than an individual chapter are like individual scenes or pages out of that chapter. And for the most part, this is used whenever you get close to the present day. As you get closer to the present, it becomes more and more meaningful to divide things into these smaller and smaller and smaller units. Mostly for this class, we're going to use this for the very most recent parts of Earth history. Stay tuned. Next section, we talk about absolute age.